It's time to take a deep dive into the lore of one of the Xenos races, in particular, the youngest of the bunch. It's the 35th millennium, specifically 789 M35, and Adeptus Mechanicus explorator ship, the Land's Vision, just stumbled across a dusty little rock out on the eastern fringes of the Milky Way. And when they scanned the surface, what did they find? Well, apparently some type of caveman. Primitive, plains-dwelling Xenos cavemen that just figured out how to rub two sticks and make a bundle of fire, along with bashing simple tools together. Standard Imperial protocol dictates that before you can colonize the newly discovered world, you need to wipe the slate clean. So, as one does, you log the coordinates, prep the cleansing fleets, and prepare to erase this insignificant species from the cosmic record. But then, right as the hammer is about to drop, the sky literally tears open as a violent, sudden, and rather massive warp storm erupts in this sector, swallowing the entirety of the planet and cutting it off from the rest of the galaxy. Now, the Imperium, distracted by apocalyptic warfare of the Age of Apostasy, shrugs its shoulders and files away the records, then completely forgets this primitive alien species ever existed. Fast forward exactly 6,000 years and the Imperium is now patrolling the Ultima Segmentum, near a place called Delvin, when system defense ships encounter a sleek, unknown class of Xenos vessel. This ship ignores all naval challenges, so the Imperium does what the Imperium does best, and they blow it out of the void. But when they recover the wreckage and examine the bodies, the genetic markers ring a very old alarm bell, as they match the cavemen from the Land's Vision's records. As it appears in just 6 millennia, a literal blink in the galactic scale of time, this species went from banging rocks together to engineering faster than light space travel. For context, it took humanity tens of thousands of years to make that kind of leap. This rapid, almost unnatural elevation suddenly presented a massive new threat in one of the Imperium's many tenuous borders, especially when the Inquisition realized that some fringe human worlds were already quietly trading with them. It was a revelation that eventually triggered the Damocles Crusade, a brutal collision between the Imperium and a technologically terrifying new player in the galactic chessboard. But to understand how the Tau Empire managed this impossible leap, we have to look at what happened beneath that warp storm. While the rest of the galaxy was locked out, the early Tau were nomadic hunter-gatherers, but as they spread across their homeworld, they began to rapidly, almost aggressively adapt to their environment, in particular because they had a significantly shortened lifespan. The Tau who moved into the mountains literally grew flaps of skin and lighter bones in order to let them glide on thermal drifts. Those who settled near river valleys mastered agriculture, metallurgy, and architecture at blinding speed, building the very first true cities on their planet. Wanderlust drove others to become merchants, sailing on crude bar ships up and down rivers in order to mediate trade, while further still, another group stayed out on the plains and grew physically larger, becoming incredibly skilled and fierce hunters. It was a biological and sociological explosion of incomprehensible scale. But with rapid evolution comes growing pains, and for the Tau, those pains were nearly terminal. The differences between the tribes festered into a horrific meat-grinding global war. The mountain gliders and the plain hunters allied to violently sack the river valleys. Merchant caravans were slaughtered in the mud to stop alliances from forming. City-dwelling Tau leveraged their architecture to build massive fortresses and quickly invented black powder weaponry just to survive. But with trade dead, farms burned, fresh water blocked, disease began to tear through the squalor. Just as many Tau were dying from sickness as they were from cannon fire. Their records call this era Mont Au, the Terror, or the Death Age if you will, as they were completely isolated from the stars, tearing their own throats out in the dark. And then the lights appeared. Tau legends state that it happened at the great fortress city of Philotan, the city which had been under a brutal, suffocating siege by the plains warrior tribes for 5 long years. The defenders had thick walls and heavy cannons, but starvation and disease were finally breaking them. The plains warriors refused all negotiation. They wanted nothing less than absolute annihilation for Philotan. But just as the city was about to fall, strange lights danced across the skies as 2 mysterious robed Tau walked out from the wasteland. One walked straight into the bloodthirsty plains camp, exuding a strange but quiet authority. that absolutely nobody could biologically resist. The other walked right up to the impenetrable gates of the fortress. Within hours, the impossible happened. The gates opened, and weapons were lowered as the two sides started to talk. These strangers were the first Ethereals, and they didn't speak of conquest and blood. They spoke of philosophy, a utilitarian, almost mystical mandate called the Tao Va, or the greater good. As they explained that every Tao, regardless of their tribe, must work for the collective betterment of everyone else. And the terrifying part is that everyone just magically agreed across the globe. As more Ethereals stepped out of the shadow, wielding what would be at one point seen as an irresistible supernatural charisma. And with that, within a few short years, the centuries of absolute planetary slaughter evaporated, and the entire species was now working under terrifyingly perfect harmony. Today, that harmony is expanding outward into the eastern fringes, as the Tau Empire isn't just the Tau anymore. It's a rapidly growing multi-species coalition held together by the Ethereal's greater good philosophy, as they have assimilated the mercenary crew of Peach, the insectoid Vespid, the psychic nomad Niskar, and even to the absolute of Inquisitors and all good humans, defectors known as the Guavesa, who willingly abandon the Emperor and humanity as a whole to join this bright new shiny empire. The Tau claim to be entirely peaceful, always offering a hand of friendship and asking worlds to join them voluntarily. But make no mistake, underneath that utopian shine is a cold, calculated machine. If you refuse their peaceful overtures, they will seamlessly pivot to conquering and enslaving your planet, using pulse rifles and massive battlesuits to sear flesh straight from the bone. Anyone who stands in their way of their benign intentions will perish. And as they brace against brutal orc raids along with the looming cosmic horror of the Tyranid, you have to wonder, is the greater good a miracle of enlightenment, or is it the most successful, inescapable cult the galaxy has yet devised? So now that we've established that the Tau went from Stone Age nomads to terrifyingly effective interstellar empire builders in the blink of the cosmic eye, we have to dive a little bit deeper into what the Tau are. So to really understand them, we have to look under the hood. You see, the caste system in the Tau Empire isn't just a social hierarchy or a job assignment, it's literally part of their biology. Over thousands of years of isolation, the different tribes didn't just develop different cultures, they physically mutated into distinct subspecies. And once the Ethereals took over, they took a look at this natural evolution and locked it into place, creating a system that strictly forbids interbreeding, guaranteeing if you're born into the fire caste, you have been biologically engineered for millennia through selective breeding to be a warrior, meaning you're larger with more muscle mass. If you're a part of the air caste, you're tall, hollow-boned, and incredibly light. The earth caste itself are stocky and brilliant builders, while the water caste are naturally predisposed to linguistic charms. Your destiny isn't written in the stars, or even your own choice. It's hardwired into your DNA. If you were to stand face to face with a Tau, the first thing you'd notice is they have this uncanny valley effect. They are indeed humanoid, but since having developed from an ungulate type species, they're just different enough that it becomes deeply unsettling to the human eye. They have this leathery gray-blue skin that exudes almost no moisture, making them look perpetually dry. Instead of feet, they have hooves, and their hands end in only 4 digits, with 3 fingers and a thumb. But it's their face that is genuinely alien. Their faces are rather flat, like a pug, with wide eyes and no nose. And running down the center of their forehead, where their nose should be, is an eye or a Y-shaped slit, depending on the variation of the Tau you're dealing with. Because they lack a traditional nose, their primary olfactory organs are actually located within their mouth, meaning that they literally taste the air, gathering scent particles with complex cilia that have been developed on their tongue, depositing them into internal receptors within their throat. Their sense of smell is so incredibly sharp that they can sense the emotional states of other Tau. They can literally taste when their significant other is pissed off, and they are even able to notice the distinct bioengineered taste of a space marine. Their eyes are just as fascinating as they are flawed. Tau vision actually extends into the ultraviolet range and infrared spectrums, which combined with their incredible patience makes them some of the most lethal sharpshooters in the galaxy when they're using their plasma and railgun weaponry. But here's the catch: their pupils functionally cannot dilate. Because of this, their depth perception is staggeringly poor, as their focusing reflexes are too slow, meaning they struggle heavily in low light situations. This has led them to rely almost exclusively on technological aid to make up for these biological blind spots. Even their hearing is slightly stunted, as they are largely deaf to higher frequencies, but are highly sensitive to low vibrations. The sounds that humans just feel as uncomfortable rumblings reverberate in their skulls as if you were beating them over the head with them. This strange auditory range has led to the running joke amongst Imperial scholars that the Tau have an absolutely lamentable taste in music. Because of these physical limitations in close quarters, the Tau suffer, which has led them to attempt to avoid melee combat at all costs, preferring to reason with enemies first, or paying their carnivorous troop mercenaries to handle the messy close-up fighting. But the most defining feature in Tau biology isn't something they have, but rather it's something they lack. It's a known fact that the Tau have absolutely zero psychic ability. In the 40k universe, a human soul burns like a bonfire in the warp, which is what attracts the demons and allows for psychic mutations to occur. But the Tau, to a demon looking out from the Imperium, they seem almost as little more than a cold, shifting will-o-wisp in the breeze, a dim, barely there spark, which, while not granting them the awe-inspiring powers of a psyker, gives them this natural resistance to the mind-altering powers of the warp. But it also leaves them incredibly vulnerable. Because they have no psychic presence, they have no navigators. They cannot tear holes into reality to travel through the warp, as the Imperium does. Instead, they are forced to travel at sub-light relativistic speed. In essence, they are creeping through the terrifying empty darkness of space, entirely ignorant of the cosmic horrors that are lurking just behind the veil of reality. Which brings us to the final, most chilling piece of the puzzle, the Ethereals. The Ethereals are known to possess a biological aura of authority over the Tau, and we know that they just walked out of the wastelands thousands of years ago. A species that had been slaughtering itself to extinction miraculously dropped their weapons and then agreed to get along. For centuries, the Imperium wondered how. Then Inquisitor Brahim Saham ordered Magos biologist Sir Hal Darvis to conduct a dissection of a Tau Ethereal. What Darvis found was strange, to say the least, as what was buried deep within their skull changed everything humanity knew about the Tau. Right behind that eye-shaped slit on their forehead, the Ethereals possessed a weak, diamond-shaped bony ridge, which was an organ entirely absent from every other Tau species. The Magos note suggests a terrifying theory. This organ is capable of releasing a highly complex, powerful hormonal cocktail laced with a myriad of chemical signifiers. The quiet authority that united their dying planet might not be a brilliant philosophy, or even spiritual enlightenment at all. It's highly probable that the greater good is nothing more than a weaponized pheromone, a latent biological mind control system. As it is understood, the Tau don't strictly follow the Ethereals out of a sense of moral duty. They're basically chemically leashed to them. And the darkest part of this all is that the Tau are naturally disinclined to research this. They will conquer worlds, burn cities, and march into the void of space completely unaware that their free will was stolen from them just around 6,000 years ago by the very saviors who stopped their extinction. When you see a fire warrior in full kit, they look vaguely human-shaped, right? 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, you know, the standard stuff. But if you strip away the pulse rifles and the high-tech armor, their skeletal structure is just wrong. First of all, they don't have feet, they have hooves. Their lower legs have a much shorter tibia and fibula bones compared to ours, and even the Eldars. There's also the fact that their joints are almost completely identical to arthropods. Think deer, cows, and goat. Imperial scholars like Magos Shale and rogue trader Janus Darkey have actually theorized that the Tau did not evolve from primates like we did. They think that the Tau have evolved from a ruminant or a bovine species. Really, visualize this. It is a species of militarized, spacefaring dairy cow. But here's the funny thing, their evolution was so fast that their organs didn't evolve at the same rate that their body did. It's accelerated evolution, which sounds cool from an outside perspective, actually becomes horrifying when you realize it left them as a biological patchwork. This is why bionics won't just plug and play with the Tau, as their anatomy is so fundamentally different that a tech priest has to basically redesign a limb from scratch. If you were to cut a Tau, which happens quite frequently in the 41st millennium, you'd notice that they don't bleed red. Their blood is a vivid purplish blue color, sometimes described as a haunting cyan. This is because instead of iron-based hemoglobin like us, or even the Eldar, their blood uses cobalt, but their internal organs are where the real nightmare begins. They do indeed have have a heart, but it's a weird heart, as it has the usual valve, but it's also wrapped in a complex set of filter sheaths and connected directly to the kidneys. Imperial dissections suggest that the Tau heart actually doubles as their liver. It functions as a multi-purpose pump, and the fat surrounding it is actually toxic to other species. They also have multi-purpose stomachs, though one seems to be a vestigial leftover from their grass-eating ancestors. And the part that I genuinely find creepy is that the Tau have no bone marrow. In humans, that's where our immune system and blood cells form much of what makes them them. In the Tau, the immune system is dispersed just beneath the skin. They are quite literally built different to the point that human drugs have almost zero effects on them and vice versa. So now let's talk about the sensory experience. Being near the Tau is not what you'd expect. If you're standing in the room with one of them, you'll notice a bitter, sharp aroma, almost smelling like spoiled milk. But the worst thing of it all is they have something called Farsight scales, and these are small scales located on their head and neck, occasionally appearing along their spine as well. They aren't always visible, but they are directly tied to the Tau's nervous system. When a Tau experiences primal fear or a massive spike in emotion, these scales unconsciously rise. However, since they're connected with the same nervous system, even the lightest grays can cause ungodly amounts of pain within them. The final piece of the Tau biological puzzle is the fact that they burn twice as bright on a biological scale. In the grim darkness of the far future, everyone's life is cheap, but the Tau are naturally on a much shorter timer than any other species. Their natural lifespan is so incredibly short that even their eldest and most experienced members of their societies only last about an average of 40 Terran years. They live, they learn, they fight, and die in the time it takes a human to hit middle age. Now, they have figured out that it is possible to extend this with treatments derived from Imperial tech, but the Tau consider it unnatural and recognize that it requires a massive amount of customization of drugs for their specific individual bodies, making it unlikely to be able to do it on scale. Because their lives are so short, they have adapted to be hyperproductive. A Tau only realistically needs 1.5 to 3 hours of sleep every 15 hours, meaning that they are awake almost the entirety of their lives, working for the greater good. Even their childhood is efficient, as they aren't raised by parents in a cozy home. They're raised in the communal nursery operated by drones. From the moment they can walk, they are being shaped by AI and Ethereal doctrine. So you basically have a species of bovid ancestors with cobalt blood, a heart that works as a liver, ruining any chance they have of a good buzz, scales that pop up when they're scared, and a 40-year lifespan that they spend almost entirely awake, with the kicker of robotic nurseries being where their childhood is spent. Now that we have a grasp on Tau biology, we should move on into their deeper societal structures. In the Tau Empire, war isn't seen as a glorious sacrifice, it's a job for the Firecaste. Their military structure is terrifyingly organized, as you start with a cadre, which is basically a version of a company. These are soldiers who usually grow up together from their time in their nursery, and because of being raised together from early childhood, they know each other's moves before they even make them. From there, you have the next scale, contingent, then ballot, and finally commanders. But here's where it gets a little eerie. The entire operation is seen by a coalition led by the Ethereals. It's a perfect, literal top-down pyramid of absolute coordination, being biologically reinforced by the magic guys who just popped up randomly one day. While an Imperial commander might be screaming for a bayonet charge, the Tau are sitting back and looking at a digital map, calculating the exact amount of plasma they need to erase a zip code, and assuaging the biological responses and ability to think of other Tau through chemical means. Now, if you want to understand the Tau master strategy, you have to learn the words Mon Ka and Kao Yun. Mon Ka, known as the killing blow, is the Tau's perfect strike stratagem. It's not a slow grind. It's a surgical, overwhelming application of force at a single point to end the fight before the enemy even knows it started. But there's also Kao Yung, also referred to as the patient hunter. This is the art of the ambush, where the Tau will pick a spot and set a lure, which is often their own allies, like the Kroot or even human Guevesa auxiliaries, and then just wait. They'll let you think you're winning by slaying all their supposed allies, and then they'll just blast you into oblivion. They use pathfinders to paint you with enough marklights from miles away And before you see a single Tau soldier, broadsides and crisis suits are railing high-tech death from the horizon. They even use independent squadrons of AI drones, these little hovering machines that don't feel pain, fear, or hatred. They just soak up bullets and provide shield cover. It's Mega Tau warfare, a high-speed, high-mobility dance where they are to stay at range and just nip at you until you die of 1,000 cuts. But this all brings us back to the heart of the matter, the greater good, or the Tauva. On paper, it does sound utopian, but as you've seen above, where every self-aware being is supposed to be equal with one another. In this philosophy, you should put away your petty squabbles and work for the greater collective. They'll say they don't want to destroy you, your religion, or your culture. They just want you to fit in their machine. Some Imperial worlds, tired of the crushing weight of the God Emperor's tithes, look at the Tau and think, hey, that might be a nice change of pace, and they join up voluntarily. But then there's the rub. If you refuse the greater good, if you decide you'd rather remain unenlightened, the Tau don't just say okay and walk away. They see your desire for independence as selfish, and they treat the galaxy's harmony under them as paramount. That's when all the diplomacy vanishes and the Ethereals give the word for the killing blow to arrive. It's a philosophy of peace, which is perfectly comfortable, not only searing the flesh off your bones if you don't want to play along, but also using anyone who joins them that isn't a Tau as bait for the Cao Yun. So we've covered their biology, taking a look into the mind control, along with their combat tactics and their general society as a whole. But now we have to talk about the toys, and by that I mean their technology. Imagine you're a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and you've spent the last 400 years praying to a toaster just to get it perfectly browned every single time. And then you look at the far eastern fringe and see these blue guys casually perfecting artificial intelligence and anti-gravitic engines, while the Imperium treats technology like a jealous, angry god that needs to be appeased with incense and ritual, ironically enough, functioning more often than not. Whereas the Tau treat it like a tool that can always be improved, or just discarded if they prefer something else. They've mastered plasma technology to a degree that makes Imperial versions look cumbersome. And they don't just settle planets. They engage in stellar engineering, crafting artificial worlds and massive orbital hubs with an incredibly dynamic, almost aggressive pace of technological development, which has made the Tau a new danger in the galaxy. In part, this can be attributed to some of their technology having a significant head start through trading with the Votan, which has left them to completely avoid being stuck in an age of darkness. Rather, they're currently in the peak of their golden age and they're moving at a sprint. But here's where things start to crumble. They are, for lack of a better word, scavengers of ideas. When they met a group known as the Demiurge, who now look to be a branch of Votan, they didn't just trade, they acquired the secrets of ion weaponry and immediately started mass producing it. But it gets even darker. There were reports of Earth-cast scientists looking at Eldari Wraith construct. You know, the literal ghost robots powered by the souls of the dead. And instead of being horrified, the Tau were curious. They looked at the haunting soul-powered machines and thought, how can we apply this to our battlesuit? There is a cold lack of superstition within the Tau as a species, where concepts of the soul and magic are things to be replicated and used as you would a simple machine. But when it comes to actual boots on the ground, the Tau aren't using gunpowder or simple lasers. They use their standard issue pulse rifle, which is a masterpiece of particle physics, as it fires particles that break down into plasma pulses as they travel, giving the basic Tau soldier a longer range and more stopping power than your average bolter. Then you have their railguns, and these things use electromagnetic rails to launch slugs at such high velocities they don't just hit you, they delete whatever they touch and anything that is a mile behind them. They mount these railguns on everything, from tanks to their massive battlesuits, alongside fusion blasters and standard missile pods. This allows their Aegis of War to be clean, effective, and completely devoid of the soul or a warrior spirit, which other races obsess over. To the Tau, a gun is just a math problem-solving tool used in real time. And finally, we have to look at the Krotava, the Tau space fleet. This is the Aircast's pride and joy. For a long time, the fleet was the Ethereal's top priority because if you can't control the space between stars, the greater good is just a local dream. But the Tau learned the hard way that the galaxy galaxy is a meat grinder. During the Damocles Crusade, the Imperial Navy absolutely shredded the Tau Hydrus system, which led them to realize that their fast development wasn't fast enough, especially when the Tyranid Hive fleet started sniffing at their borders. In response, the Ethereals launched the Cor Orvush, a massive desperate mobilization program where they threw every resource they had at the Earth-cast scientists in order to bridge the gap. It's a society under immense pressure to build bigger and deadlier ships, especially now that they're in the shadow of the Tyranids, as the Imperium also begins to close in. We are now reaching the tail end of this deep dive, as we've looked at their biology, the mind control, the tech, but now we have to look at their version of manifest destiny. This is how a tiny race came from a single rock and decided the entire galaxy belonged to them, but we're gonna paint it as we're helping you improve yourself. In the Tau's history, this is broken into spheres of expansion. Each one feels like a different level of a video game, which slowly turns into a psychological horror movie. The first sphere expansion was essentially the Tau's golden age of discovery, where they left their homeworld and just started running, assimilating everything they could. Thraxans, Niskar, the Kroot. It was all greater good this and harmony that, until they hit a brick wall. One which is about as smart as a wall of bricks can be, known as the Orcs. That's when they had their first taste of a species that didn't want to talk or obey them. They didn't want to trade, and they didn't want to deal. They just wanted to use the Tau skulls as interior decorations and portable latrines. Then came the second sphere, fueled by the SFR Horizon Accelerator engines. This allowed them to cross the Damocles Gulf, which was basically the big ocean between them and the rest of the neighborhood. This is where the impending doom starts to occur. As they started to take worlds on this far side, they didn't realize they were poking at a sleeping giant, one who was all too busy to pay attention to them until they made it necessary. At first, the Tau thought, oh, a local power, let's try to negotiate with them. They had no idea. They were looking at an empire made up of at least 1 million worlds of religious zealots. The Damocles Crusade was the Imperium's response, and it was a reality check of cosmic proportions, as the Tau were almost wiped out, fighting in a desperate stalemate at Dayas Sep. And it was the first time they realized that they weren't the main characters in the galaxy. However, the galaxy seemed to save their skins by the narrowest of margins, because the Imperium was forced to withdraw to deal with a hive fleet of Tyranids. It was then that the Tau Empire was on the brink of a total meltdown. They had seen the scale of the Imperium and realized that they were tiny, but the Ethereals, ever the masters of the spin, turned that fear into fuel. The third sphere expansion was massive, which was painted as an aggressive bounce back led by the legendary Commander Farsight, and later Commander Shadowsun. They went on a tear, reclaiming everything they lost, snatching up Imperial worlds while the humans were busy elsewhere. This was the peak of Tau military confidence. They had the momentum, they had the math, and they thought they were unstoppable. And then the sky broke. After the Great Rift tore the galaxy asunder, the Tau launched their fourth sphere expansion, using experimental antimatter engines to attempt to keep chasing the galaxy. But as soon as the fleet jumped, the entire thing, thousands upon thousands of ships, millions upon millions of soldiers, just vanished in total radio silence. The Tau Empire, in order to paint their losses as less than, decided to pretend it was a tragic accident, a massive loss, but understandable. But years later, a wormhole opened up in the Starride Nexus, and through that wormhole came the survivors of the fourth sphere expansion. But they weren't the same. They had been launched through the warp without a Geller field. Now remember what I said about the Tau having no souls? Well, they were mostly fine, but their non-Tau allies, the Kroot, the humans, and the Vespids, were actually ravaged by the entities of the warp. When the fourth sphere survivors came back, they were changed. They were colder, more xenophobic, and they started acting like every other race in the galaxy, purging their own allies when they weren't of the same race. They had seen what lived in the dark, and it broke the concept of the greater good right out of them. Then comes the fifth and sixth spheres of expansion. Now the fifth sphere, which is currently pouring through the Starride Nexus, is trying to expand into the territory that the fourth sphere supposedly cleared. It's a messy high-stakes colonial push into the galaxy that is more dangerous than ever. And despite the fifth sphere not even being finished yet, Ethereal Supreme Aunva is already planning and initiating the steps of the sixth sphere. Thing is, Aunva has technically been dead for a long time. He was slain by Kalex's assassin, and the Ethereals are currently hiding his death, using holograms and AI to give orders and estimate what he would desire. The entire sixth sphere expansion is being planned and controlled by machine. So now you have a young, hopeful race led by a literal hologram pretending to be something it's not. going into a galaxy they don't fully understand, following a philosophy that is literally a chemical lie. All the while, a hole in reality threatens to swallow them whole. And that leads us to something far creepier, how the Tau actually interact with each other and how their society breaks down. Well, the creepiest things about the Tau is how they interact and communicate. They don't just use words, it's a whole body experience. They use intricate hand gestures and subtle movements of the body, potentially even pelvic thrusts, to add layers of emotion into what they're saying. But this is a weakness, since it's almost instinctual for them to display their emotions and their true inner thoughts through bodily movement. So if you see a Tau putting their hands behind their back or out of view, you know they're not just being formal, they're hiding their true intention and attempting to mask their subconscious emotional reactions. It's like they're attempting to wear a physical poker face at all times, but are unable to control themselves. And then there's the Guevesa smile. Because the Tau have integrated so many humans into their empire, they actually started picking up human quirks. Some Tau have actually started mimicking human facial expressions, like smiling. Now imagine a creature with a face flatter than a pug, with no nose, and a vertical slit right down the middle, trying to pull off a human grin. It's enough to make your skin crawl. Pure, unadulterated, unremittent, uncanny valley material, as they're trying to be relatable to an extreme, and it ends up feeling like a biological horror movie being played out right in front of you. Now, everything in the Tau life is broken down into a caste system, and it's not just a career path, it's your entire identity from the moment you're born to the day you die. And while they don't have a class struggle, so to speak, as a janitor will be respected just as much as a general because they both are serving the greater good, their hierarchy is absolute and unshakable. So there is no, and I mean no, social motility possible at all. The 5 castes are as follows. Number 1, the Ethereal. These are the spiritual and political masters of the entirety of the race. I could not stress to you enough how their authority is total and absolute. If your Tau wife and you are walking down the road and the Ethereal just has their fancy, suddenly your wife no longer likes you. From a biological standpoint, she's the Ethereal wife now. There are no questions, no hesitations. The level of control goes beyond even what the Emperor of Mankind ever displayed. Quite frankly, it's sickening. There's a poor caste, also known as the water caste. These are the diplomats and merchants of the Tau. They are the flow of the society, as they can learn any language, navigate through bureaucracy, and charm their way into or out of almost any situation. Which means they are the ones who are sent to convince you to join their empire and make it seem like it was your idea. There is a Shash of the Fire Caste. These are the warriors, and we've talked about them before. They are the muscle, bred for strength, aggression, and to be slightly bigger than the average Tau, but they're still weaker than the average Imperial guardsman. However, these individuals have been raised from birth to be nothing but that. A warrior tempered by discipline. There's a Feel, or the Earth Caste, and they are the backbone of the entire society, as they are the builders, the scientists, the farmers, and the most numerous of the race. Without them, the tech that we've talked about previously just doesn't exist, and it can't be repaired. None of the other castes can figure it out. Lastly, there's Core, or the Air Caste. These are the pilots, the guys that spend so much time in zero gravity that they have literally gone beyond hollow bone. If they were to step onto a planet with even a moderate gravity, slightly below that of Terra, they become so sluggish and fragile that they are sickly. They are the invisible caste, living their entire lives in the cold metal hulls of their Corvata. Now we have to understand the Seps. Just like humans have different cultures based on where they're born, be it New York or Bombay, the Tau are defined by their homes. You have Tau from the original homeworld of Boria, which is basically a giant military academy where the most aggressive warriors come from, and Borkan, the center of all things nerdy and scientific for the Tau. Then you have places like Dianyo, which was cut off from the empire for a while and has now become considered backwoods or rustic. You also have Yesia, which is the most cosmopolitan area of the empire, a true melting pot where you'll see aliens from all across the galaxy walking on the streets. Each Sep is ruled by an elemental council, but at the end of the day, this council is just a facade because an ethereal governor always has the last word, regardless if they're an idiot. From the slowest rank of the Sol to the highest masters of O, every single Tau knows exactly where they fit in and that they'll never be able to move out. It's a perfectly orderly, almost sterile society. But as we've seen, that order comes at a price. Whether it is their short lifespans, their biological specializations, or the eerie chemical obedience to the Ethereals, the Tau race has traded away almost everything, including their free will, to survive a galaxy that wants to eat them alive. And unfortunately, more often than not, they're not doing too hot. Going into further detail with the Sept, we'll start with the hub of the Empire, Tauna and Dayanoi. First, you have Tauna. This is where the first colony was ever established, and if you're a fan of orbital megastructures, this is a place for you. Tauna is basically one giant shipyard, boasting a chain of enormous orbital docks and the largest contingent of aircraft void stations in existence. Now, while every Sept has a fleet, Dauan is its own fleet. Then you have Dayanoi. This is a place that gives people the most unsettling visuals, as it's named for its twin moons, but for the longest time, it was actually swallowed up by a space storm of fierce and unnatural qualities, cut off from the Empire for ages, left in the dark to fend off wave after wave of orc incursions. Because they were isolated for so long, the rest of the Tau look at these people as backwards and rustic, not truly part of the greater good as a whole. Then we move on to the more civilized sectors, Brokan, which is the brain of the Empire, a massive center of learning and academia, stuffed to the brim with earth-cast scientists and rich mining operations. If you see a Firecast warrior testing a weapon that looks like it belongs in a sci-fi movie, they're probably from Brokan. On the other hand, you have Delphi. This Sept has a bit of a tragic history. It was absolutely ravaged by the Imperium during the Damocles Crusade, as all of its cities were leveled and the entirety of the colonies snuffed out. But the Tau are nothing if not efficient. The world was rebuilt almost instantly through trade, becoming one of, if not the most cosmopolitan of all the Septs, where you can see a crowd of Kroots, humans, and weirder things all walking together, alongside the famously smooth-talking watercast merchant. It's a bustling hub of life built right on top of a massive grave from a war that almost extincted the species. Now, if you're looking for the war in Warhammer of the Tau, you're looking at Vjorla. The name literally translates to hot-blooded, and it orbits a binary star system. The people there are, well, rather aggressive. Vjorla is home to most of the respected Firecast academies, where they spent their entire life breaking orc invasions against a cliffside. If a Tau is actually looking for a fight, they're likely from Vjorla. Then there's Seka. This is the most densely populated world in the Empire, an urbanized sprawl that produces more colonization fleets than any other. The warriors here are known for being honorable, well, at least the Tau equivalent of that, as they are the stoic and professional heart of the entirety of any expansion. And finally, we have Falshia. This area is for the Tinkerers. They're the ones constantly pushing the limits of what Tau tech can do, often being the first to field test prototype armors and system upgrades. Between the aggressive Vjorla and the Falshia, you start to see how this young race managed to survive the galaxy that's been trying to kill them since the moment they decided to poke at the angry religious people. It's a massive, diverse empire that works in tandem to accomplish greater tasks than they individually could. But now let's talk about some slightly different world in the Tau. You have the veritable retirement home and ghost sectors of Autal and Nards. First, let's talk about Autal. This is a beautiful, verdant Sept world, and it's the kind of place you see on a postcard for the greater good, selling you the myth of the greater good. But it has a very specific, almost eerie exclusivity, as only honored Tau heroes are ever allowed to retire here. It's a paradise behind a velvet rope, a reward for a lifetime of obedience and chemical-based servitude. But then you have Nardas, which was once a thriving Sept and a jewel of the expansion. Then, for reasons the Ethereals refuse to explain, it became almost entirely abandoned. The Tau who remain there are different. They're quick-tempered, brooding, untrustworthy, and seen as the black sheep of the entirety of the species. Moving towards the Perdus Rift, we have the Kelsha, and honestly, sucks to be them. Kelsha has been the galaxy's punching bag for centuries, as they are the ones to go toe-to-toe with High Fleet Gorgon, and that trauma has fundamentally changed who they are. While the rest of the Tau are offering handshakes and trade deals, the Tau from Kelsha are solemn and taciturn, openly hostile to all alien species, as they've seen what an alien life usually looks like, teeth and claws, to the point that they're no longer interested in making friends. Similarly, Tashivar is a frontier Sept that has been hardened by constant orc invasions and pirate raids. Its people are tenaciously hardy, the kind of Tau who don't smile at the Guevesa because they're too busy reloading to shoot them. On the flip side, you have Elysir, the moon-heavy system where the Earthcast is king. They mine constantly in full battlesuit for ore. However, here they spent most of their free time on poetry and artwork. It's a sept of warrior poets and engineers, respected for their creativity. Then there's Turku, which is perhaps the most important diplomatic hub for the entire second sphere. Turku is famous for its massive Ethereal temples and its alien institutes. This is where an alien ambassador is to be brought when they are instructed in the ways of the greater good. Functionally, it's a giant re-education facility, but it's wrapped in beautiful architecture, where you're taught how to be a good alien before being sent back to your home to convince the people to surrender and obey their blue masters. Then we have Baisha, or the world between spheres. This place took forever to settle because of the atmosphere, which was originally unbreathable, and it took generations of Earth-cast machines churning away to make the air safe for Tau lungs. Today, its massive fortress system is packed with air-cast fleets, orbital defense batteries, in order for it to operate as a gatekeeper of the second sphere, a world literally built from the air up as a technological bulwark. Now we move on to Kilshiam. This was an imperial world, and it's a perfect example of the Tau's benign expansion. When they took it, they didn't just kill all the humans. Instead, the ones who swore fealty to the greater good were resettled deeper into the empire. It sounds like a nice vacation, right? For your safety and assimilation. But we should step back and think about what they meant by resettled. They were moved away from their homes, separated from their families and their history, to be properly integrated into the system. The Tau colonists are known for the luck and subterfuge, which makes you wonder just how lucky were they actually to get these individuals to agree with them. Then we have Filarus, a world taken back from an orc warlord, where the earth and air castes who have settled here became famous for their tenacious refusal to accept defeat. They've got a stoic, almost grim appearance, and their acceptance of the greater good is utilitarian, not even truly believing in it. They aren't the happy-go-lucky pioneers that they once were before. Then there's the third sphere expansion, which at the absolute rock bottom of is Mogulov Bay. It used to be an imperial hive world known as Agrelon, the gateway to the entire system. Shadowsun and Aumva won a massive legendary victory here, and it was going to be the crown jewel of the third sphere expansion, as they bit the thumb of the Imperials. However, the Tau don't seem to want to learn the fact that the Imperium does not like losing its gateways, so they launched a counterattack so violent, so overwhelming that it ended with an exterminatus. Not out of defeat, but out of spite. They literally set the atmosphere of the planet on fire, in a way that they made sure that if they couldn't have Agrelon, no one could, to make the Tau rethink of moving closer to the Imperium's vital navigational point. However, the Earthcast managed to throw up a shield over a single city, Lo Vash Tau, saving a tiny fraction of the population from a global firestorm. But they woke up the next day to an absolute nightmare. The world was completely charred, reduced to a husk, and surrounded by Imperial blockades. At this point, the entire Damocles Gulf was being set ablaze by Imperial technology, creating a literal wall of fire between these Tau and the Imperium as a whole. The survivors of Mogulov Bay realized that they were trapped, and their only hope of survival was the nearby Farsight Enclaves, a splinter group of the Tau who had broken away from the Ethereals and the Empire as a whole. But the Ethereals just couldn't let that happen. They were so terrified of the Enclaves gaining strength or influence that they sent Commander Farsight with an order: slay all survivors from the Tau Empire. Tau soldiers, for the first time in history, were ordered to hunt down and kill their own brothers and sisters, refugees who had just survived a planetary apocalypse, simply to keep them from joining a rival faction. Most of those rebel Tau were wiped out in the cold, dark of space on their own. A few escaped, but the message was clear: the greater good was only good as long as you were under the Ethereal's thumb. If you stepped outside of that very, very narrow circle, you weren't a citizen anymore. They wanted you as dead as they wanted the Imperials or the Space Marines. The third sphere ended with the assassination of Aunva, and the Empire realizing that the galaxy isn't just hostile, it's spiteful. The Tau grew in size, but they lost their innocence, and they gained a sectarian break within their society as a whole. And now this brings us to the ultimate what if of the Tau, the breakaway empire known as the Farsight Enclaves. Imagine, if you will, an empire raised to believe that without the Ethereals, society just collapses into a primal bloody mess. Then you look across the Damocles Gulf and realize that there is a shadow empire over there, one and not led by spiritual masters, but by a warrior king, Commander Farsight. And you come to realize that Commander Farsight didn't just leave, he took the concept of the greater good and proved it could function without the people holding its leash. It's the ultimate heresy for the Ethereals, and it absolutely terrified them. The Enclaves are a collection of septs where the entire caste system is topsy-turvy, as the Fire caste is the one who holds complete and utter control. We don't even know the names of most of the worlds because Farsight has turned the territory into a literal fortress. Any probe the Tau Empire sends over there to check in is usually turned into space dust before it reaches the border proper. When a Tau ship does catch a glimpse of these forces, they're actually looking into a distorted mirror. The ships and armor of the Farsight Enclaves do bear some markings and the same geometry of most Tau equipment, but the colors and patterns are all wrong. These are unsanctioned, rebellious, and deeply unsettling to any loyal Tau. It's like finding a lost colony of your own people who have started to speak a language you almost understand, but don't get the intent behind it and can't quite grasp the reality of it. Because Farsight left centuries ago, you'd expect their tech to be rusted and junked out, outdated relics from a bygone era. And for a while, it was. But recently, Battlefield reports have started showing something impossible. The Farsight warriors aren't just using old gear. They're using classified prototypes, as they have technology that was developed in the Empire after Farsight went rogue. This, frankly, shouldn't be possible. And it means the Ethereals' total control is breaking down, and they have multiple leaks. Whether it's high-level spycraft, daring thefts, or more chillingly, an entire team of Earth-cast scientists defecting in the middle of the night to join the rebel cause, the Enclaves are staying rather modern and up to date with the rest of the Tau Empire. It makes many wonder if the Ethereal's grip is really one of divine authority and how absolute it really is. Especially now that you have the ghost of Aun Va leading its faithful from a silicone microprocessor, the traumatized survivors of the fourth sphere purging their own allies, and Farsight waiting in the dark with his stolen tech and his own version of the greater good for a chance to strike and tip the balances of the Empire in his favor. With this, we can understand that the Tau started as a small flame of hope in a galaxy full of monsters, but as they grew, they realized that the biggest monster of them all might be the one holding their own leash. And that's the story of the Tau, a race that tried to bring a flashlight into a knife fight being held in a dark prison cell, only to realize that the flashlight was actually being held by someone they didn't actually know, and it made them the most succulent of targets. Their existence is a tragedy wrapped in a utopian fantasy. If you enjoyed this trip into the eastern fringes with me, and you want to see more deep dives like this, please hit that like button. I know everyone says it, but it actually really helps the algorithm figure that people like hearing some of this long-form storytelling and deep dives into factions. Also, comment in the comments to let me know your thoughts. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.